So what's the confusion around light commercial is that there are really four buckets that light commercial falls into, and they're not four buckets we're used to using. The first bucket is around building language, like is it a light commercial space like retail, a dentist office, a doctor's office, a bank? So that's how a lot of people think about it. The second place is around equipment language, like these are unitary systems, and the traditional understanding around this group of light commercial equipment is it's labeled as light commercial. But the confusion here is you can have the exact same piece of equipment as commercial. And if it's not labeled properly, because equipment manufacturers might grab a piece of commercial equipment and sell it into a light commercial application because it's the same piece of equipment. This is the sort of the labeling and the knowledge that's used by OEMs like Carrier, York, McLean, etc. Third bucket is around capacity on size. A lot of people think of it as 3 to 25 tons of cooling. So 3 tons of cooling has about 9 to 12 pounds of refrigerant. 25 tons of cooling can have 50, 60, 75 pounds of refrigerant. And the confusion here is the fourth one, which is the channel language, which are used by those OEMs around supplying equipment. Like they will sell light commercial to light commercial vendors. And this gives them a chance to double up on their supply network or channel sales network by saying, oh, we've got some that are light commercial. For the commercial guys, these are the guys that buy from 25 tons up to 1,000 tons. And for the light commercial, these are guys that are installing anywhere from 3 tons at your house all the way to fixing your doctor's office, right? Or dentist's office, or maybe they're working on the roof of a retailer, like a small retailer in a mall. So that becomes really confusing because oftentimes the EPA is talking in 2 languages. One is we are regulating all systems 15 pounds and over unless they're light commercial. Well, I just gave you the 3 buckets other than regulatory that they're tracking here. And if you ask one retailer, do you use light commercial? They're going to say yes now, because that will then obscure them from being part of that EPA tracking. But if you talk to a bigger manufacturer, if you talk to the OEM manufacturers like Trane, McQuay, York, they'll say, oh, it's over 15 pounds, therefore it falls into this jeopardy bucket of being commercial. It's not just light commercial. But that's not an enforceable EPA responsibility. You can't get, the marketplace to enforce EPA's regulations. It is up to EPA to define what light commercial means, and they haven't done it. And it's really absolutely mind-boggling how difficult this is to get an answer out of them. I've been asking them for 2 years, and they don't have an answer. That's where the confusion comes from.
You talked about EPA compliance. Obviously, that's a challenge. What are the repercussions we're looking at here due to the confusion? And I think let's talk a little bit about compliance and also cost. Are there like repercussions and challenges with that?
So I'll say it's posture related, right? So what are the repercussions? We're now starting to see where one administration comes into office, another one leaves, another one comes in, they change the way they accept the definition. This is likely heading to the courts. This definition will get fleshed out in court. The EPA at some point in the next 4 or 5 years will find somebody who's done something wrong, because the new administration or an old administration might change the way a definition works, and they're going to file a claim against that institution, and then they're going to go to court. They're going to say, hey, we think we have a defensible position. We don't think you can find us. And it will eventually make its way to court. We need the courts. The courts help us get clarity on what the EPA meant when the EPA won't do it themselves. And Congress did not put this definition into the AIM Act. This all started around the AIM Act. Its earliest days were in the 1990s when EPA was given the responsibility to manage a system. They arbitrarily chose 50 pounds. The EPA had a chance to redo it after the AIM Act. Because they don't really understand the definition well enough, they're just as arbitrary today as they were in the 90s. It's just as messy. I know they had good intentions, but they screwed it up. And we know they screwed it up because if they had an answer of the last 28 emails that I've sent to the EPA, and I'm not alone, there's hundreds that are doing this, they would have given us their definition, but they didn't. So the repercussions are, who will be the very first company to get sued by the EPA or sue the EPA to get out of this, whatever violation they're going to be accountable for because of this definition around light commercial. So that's the first thing. Is that how you're going to want to manage your risk profile? Is that your posture, is to go on defense? Because the alternative is you just record where you use refrigerant and you record certain activities and you manage those activities. A lot of people are pretty bad at managing their activities anyway. It's an unintended consequence of having a labor shortage in a market that needs about twice as many people. So it's messy. And because it's messy, many companies may want to opt into this defensive posture and say they are using light commercial equipment because that now relieves them of that burden to record activity and therefore not have to report. I get that. I completely understand it. The EPA created this loophole by not having a good definition. It's on them. But to the person who's responsible for the equipment, light commercial and commercial equipment, they're essentially the same pieces of technology and hardware. The question you now want to ask yourself is, do we want to have a posture where our vendors aren't responsible to us, our service providers aren't accountable? So the EPA created this loophole. As the owners and operators, do they want to create a loophole where vendors don't have to be accountable to them for what they did? And I would advise people to ask themselves that question, like, is this the environment we're architecting for our vendor network to be accountable to us? And then if you want to report that to EPA, good on you, go ahead and report it. But if you don't, at least you create an accountability inside your own network that later on, if the EPA does come back to you, you have it, and you can easily justify not reporting or recording because you have this light commercial gap. But go back to your vendors and take what the EPA put in the requirement for documentation on commercial equipment above 15 pounds. Use that as an accountability tool to manage your interactions with each other. Every single service provider is documenting how many pounds of refrigerant they used because they have to bill you for it. Just don't make it so easy for them to skip out on telling you why they used it, because at some point in the very near future, these refrigerants are now obsolete. You're going to want to know, where did we use all that refrigerant last year? Because we're going to need to plan for next year. So I think of it more as an accountability tool.
What steps, if any, or advice would you give then to companies navigating these challenges?
I'd say the most important thing is to establish and audit your facilities to know how many systems are clearly defined as commercial, how many you can define as light commercial, and then ask yourself, are the vendors that we're using doing the job at these sites to keep these systems operational and efficient? If you have to add refrigerant to an AC unit after 4 years, you got a problem. 7 years is the more likely window, but you can't really start profiling your equipment until you have an on-site accurate equipment list of what's really expected of you or what you should expect of your vendors. This equipment list, every vendor does it when they win a new account. They go on site and they do an audit. You use your vendor's audit if you want. You start with that. Say, okay, we've got your list. I had one situation where we had a large public institution that had about 150 buildings, and they had not accounted for 140 packaged rooftop units as part of their equipment inventory. Well, you really can't have a conversation about what's a reasonable amount to spend on maintenance if you're missing 140 packaged rooftop units in 150 buildings, because that means you don't have any budget in mind for how you're going to replace belts, check airflow, change filters. So without that, you have really no good foundation. Unfortunately, the EPA has really made a mess of this by not really defining well what this term means. But on the other hand, it's made the industry take a look at itself and say, wait, how do we define light commercial for ourselves internally? I think that's really important. That's the next step.
So just to clarify, do you think this is like mostly affecting large companies with multi-site operations rather than those like smaller single unit companies or grocery stores?
If I'm a dentist office and I'm a one practice dentist office, I would not worry about this. Where you start to see things of scale are, like, for instance, dental offices, veterinary clinics, and retail operations are usually multi-state, multi-site operations now. That's one of the biggest changes to the retail space over the last 20 years is aggregation, like acquisition and then spread out. So if you're a retailer and you're in 8 malls across 4 states, you got to ask yourself, which states am I in? Like Colorado, Illinois, Washington, Oregon, New York, California, Massachusetts. Those are high profile states. You should ask the regulators there, what do you think light commercial means? Because since the EPA didn't define it, we'll start to see states do a better job of defining it. Do you want to be the manager who's managing 4 different, you got the same piece of equipment in 4 states across 8 malls? Do you want to be creating a different profile for how you manage that set of equipment? Don't you want to just have one rule and then just let the workforce sort it out rather than you be responsible for 8 rules? It's a challenge for us. When I did track ref, I had to stay on top of this every day. Now I've kind of eased off. I do it monthly. And when I'm talking to people about how to manage leak detections or tag a store, I'm really trying to understand where's the greatest risk for them. Are they aware of it? Do they have time to stay on top of all these regulations because they constantly change? How do they get the word out to their workforce about that rule? If you're using the government's rules to define your management style, that's a nightmare. Make your own rules, take the rules that the government's applied, do the broadest scope of that, and then develop your own set of internal policies about how you want documentation and data. And then it won't matter what rules change, what administrations come, go. It won't matter what's happening. You have set your own company rules around it. And it's not that complicated to do because purchasing departments do it every day. They set the rules, how you get paid, when you get paid, and why you might not get paid in a timely manner.